In the heart of the rural town of Ravenswood, nestled deep within the English countryside, stood the infamous Blackwood House. This ancient mansion had been a subject of local legend for generations, its grandeur and beauty overshadowed by an aura of mystery and terror. The house had been abandoned for decades, its grand halls and chambers left to the mercy of time and nature. Yet, it was not the house itself that drew people in, but the strange occurrences and unexplained events that seemed to emanate from it. The story begins with Emily Wilson, a young and ambitious journalist who had always been fascinated by the mysteries of Blackwood House. She had heard tales of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and unexplained disappearances, all of which seemed to be connected to the house. Determined to uncover the truth behind these legends, Emily decided to embark on an investigation. Chapter 1. The investigation begins. Emily arrived in Ravenswood on a crisp autumn morning. The town was quiet, with only a few locals milling about. She made her way to the local library, hoping to find some historical records or clues that might lead her to the truth about Blackwood House. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins, greeted her warmly and offered to help. "Blackwood House, you say? Well, that's a story for the ages," Mrs. Jenkins said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and fear. "Many have tried to uncover its secrets, but none have returned with anything concrete. Some say it's cursed, others claim it's just old tales. But if you're determined, I can show you some old records." Emily spent hours poring over dusty books and manuscripts, but the information was sparse and often contradictory. The only consistent theme was the mention of a family tragedy that had occurred in the house many years ago. According to local lore, the Blackwood family had been torn apart by a series of tragic events, culminating in their sudden disappearance. As the sun began to set, Emily decided to visit Blackwood House. She had heard that the house was accessible, though not officially open to the public. The walk to the house was long and eerie, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. As she approached the house, she felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. Chapter 2. The First Encounter. Upon entering the house, Emily was struck by its grandeur. The interior was surprisingly well preserved, considering its age. She began to explore, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. As she moved from room to room, she started to feel a strange presence around her. It was as if she was being watched, but whenever she turned, there was no one there. Suddenly, Emily heard a faint whisper. It was soft and indistinct, but it seemed to be calling her name. She spun around, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing. The whisper grew louder, more urgent, and Emily felt herself being drawn towards a door at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and she could sense that whatever was on the other side was waiting for her. With a deep breath, Emily pushed the door open. Inside, she found a room filled with old photographs and letters. Among them, one letter caught her eye. It was addressed to her, though it had no date or sender's name. The message was cryptic. "Do not listen to the echoes. They will consume you." Emily was baffled. How could a letter addressed to her be here? And what did it mean by the echoes? She decided to leave the house, feeling both intrigued and unsettled. Chapter 3. The Night of Terror. That night, Emily couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. She tried to focus on her research, but her mind kept drifting back to the letter and the strange whispers she had heard. As she lay in bed, she began to hear the whispers again, this time louder and clearer. They seemed to be coming from outside her window. Determined to confront whatever was happening, Emily got out of bed and approached the window. As she looked out, she saw nothing but darkness. But then she heard her name being called, louder than before. The voice was unmistakable. It was her own voice calling back to her. Suddenly, the room was filled with an intense, blinding light. Emily felt herself being pulled towards the window, as if by an unseen force. She tried to resist, but it was too strong. Just as she was about to be pulled out, everything went black. Chapter 4: The Awakening. When Emily came to, she was lying on the floor of her room. The window was open and the curtains were blowing in the wind. She had no memory of how she got there or what had happened after the light. Shaken, she decided to leave Ravenswood and abandon her investigation. However, as she packed her bags, she noticed something strange. The letter she had found in Blackwood House was now on her bedside table, with an additional sentence. "You should have listened." Chapter 5: The Descent into Madness. Over the next few days, Emily began to experience strange and terrifying occurrences. She would hear her own voice whispering to her, urging her to return to Blackwood House. The voice grew louder, more insistent, until she could no longer ignore it. Feeling compelled, Emily returned to Ravenswood. As she approached Blackwood House, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The house seemed to loom over her, its windows like empty eyes staring back. Upon entering, Emily found herself in a maze of corridors and rooms, each one leading her deeper into the heart of the house. She stumbled upon a hidden room filled with old recording equipment. In the center of the room, she found a single tape labeled with her name. As she played the tape, she heard her own voice, whispering the same phrases she had heard before. But then the voice changed. It became a chorus of whispers, all speaking in unison. The message was clear. "We have been waiting. You should not have come here." Chapter 6: The Unexpected Truth. Suddenly, the room began to spin, and Emily felt herself being pulled into a vortex of sound and light. When the chaos subsided, she found herself standing in a vast, empty space. There were no walls, no ceiling, just an endless expanse of nothingness. And then she saw them. Figures, countless figures, all whispering in unison. They were not ghosts or spirits. They were echoes of every person who had ever entered Blackwood House, including herself. The truth hit Emily like a tidal wave. Blackwood House was not haunted by ghosts. It was a nexus, a place where the fabric of reality was thin. The echoes were not malevolent spirits but residual imprints of consciousness, trapped in a loop of their own making. As Emily realized this, she felt her own consciousness begin to merge with the echoes. She was becoming one of them, forever trapped in the endless silence of Blackwood House. Chapter 7: The Final Silence. The last thing Emily heard was her own voice whispering back to her. But this time it was not a call, it was a farewell. She was no longer alone. She was part of the chorus, forever bound to the echoes of Blackwood House. The next morning, the police found Emily's car parked outside Blackwood House. She was never seen again, and the house remained standing, a monument to the mysteries it held. The locals whispered of a new echo, one that sounded like a young journalist, forever trapped in the silence of Blackwood House. And so, the legend of Blackwood House grew, a cautionary tale about the dangers of meddling with forces beyond human understanding. But for those who dared to listen closely, they might just hear the faint whisper of Emily's voice, calling out from the eternal silence. In the end, the true horror was not the supernatural entities or the mysterious house itself, but the realization that some secrets are better left unexplored, and some silences are eternal.